Colleagues, we're going to start our panel 2. Please join us, take your seats. And for the moment, we will have an expert discussion, the international experience and the existing transformation practices in the government sector, the mission and the values. I would like to introduce to you our partner and expert, an international expert, Francisco Cardona, who is a public administration international expert from the SITS project of the Ministry of Defense. And this is an in-depth presentation. Please make sure you listen carefully. It is also uploaded to your presentations. So the floor is yours, Francisco.
For your very nice presentation of my person. I will try to put a little bit of international context to the problem and issues we have been discussing this morning and listening about this morning. The first thing I would like to emphasize is the importance of the organizational culture. When we talk about organizational culture, what is this? What is the significance of this? How it is important? And we discovered that the culture is the set of behaviors and beliefs, characteristics of a particular group, organization, institution, etc. It's a relatively new field of research at the international level because it is only for the last 20 to 40 years that the notion of culture has been used by academic researchers to understand the extent to which the existing values of an organization create an organizational atmosphere which is able to foster or to prevent organizational change when the organizational change is required. The research hypothesis has been confirmed that an organizational culture is a key factor, but not the only one factor, in achieving strategic goals of the organization, in modeling the patterns, the way in which individuals interact and behave, if defines what is wrong from what is good. In this sense, is a sort of moral compass for the members of the organization. It shapes the performance of an organization as a whole and is key factor also in influencing all kinds of expectation of the organization's members. Let's go to a sort of a very rudimentary classification of organizational culture, just for us to understand in our public administration in which classification cell we would locate ourselves. There are two fundamental classes of organization, those who are inward-looking and those who are outward-looking. The inward-looking have an internal focus, and they prize integration and internal communication. In terms of stability and control of the organization, they are quite hierarchical. Internal focus is a structure and in a formal way, where leaders are not leaders in the sense we heard this morning, but are only coordinators. From the point of view of change and flexibility, they are quite difficult to change because they have a clannish culture. They are like a clan. The internal focus in the workplace makes leaders act like father figures. And rebels, those who think differently, are rejected. The dangers of this organization is what the experts called the groupthink. Those who do not think like the rest of the group, those who are dissident, are marginalized, and those who defy the prevalent beliefs are put outside the organization, are dismissed, or are just ostracized. In an outward-looking organization, the focus is on the external world, and they prize differentiation, competition, spontaneity, and interaction with the external world. They are generally market-driven. Market-driven means that the focus is on what happens outside the organization, and the leaders of the organization are usually quite demanding on the behavior of individuals within the organization. In terms of change and flexibility, they are sort of autocracies. Leaders tend to stimulate innovation, to create ad hoc groups, to introduce new ideas on the organization, and they incentivize, in a way, thinking out of the box. To transfer from the first line of organization, inward-looking organization, to outward-looking organizations is quite difficult. We have heard this morning how the survey of the Stanford, the economic faculty, was focused on ministries which, by their nature, look outside the organization, outside the public administration. Those delivering education, public services, public health care, and so on and so forth. Whereas the so-called state ministries, like the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, and the Ministry of Interior, were left out of the survey. These are what the French call ministères régaliens, the ministries who exert the power of the state are generally more inward-looking than outward-looking, because what is at stake is the capacity of the state to control, defend the society. Whereas in other ministries, more social-oriented ministries, is much easier. I don't think is easy, but is much easier than the other ministries, than the state ministries, for them to look outward, because they have in front of them they have individual people asking for services. So we, as public administrations, tend to be more located in the hierarchical, clannish type of organization than in the outward-looking organization. It's very difficult for civil servants and for public managers to be entrepreneurs. They have to follow the rules. They have to coordinate the resources. They have to make sure that all the organizations follow the regulations, etc. Whereas in a private company, the market is important, and the creation of ad hoc groups able to innovate and to think out of the box can be very important, depending on the dynamism of the relevant market where the organization, the enterprise, the firm operates. So let's have a look at the contradictory world. The next one, the contradictory world of the organizational culture and the public service. Because we in the public administration often have core values. They have been mentioned before in this round table, and also conflicting values. The core values have been under construction and guiding civil servant behavior in OECD countries during the last 200 years. 200 years means since the revolutions, the liberal revolutions, the French and the American Revolution, when they were, with the introduction of human rights, which were mentioned earlier today, in the governing perspective, in the government perspective, changed almost everything. And since then, we are in public administrations and civil services striving for giving priority to one set of values or another set of values. Like this, we can see that we are still struggling between confidentiality and the public service ethos. For example, the loyalty to the manager, as was mentioned earlier, and the public service ethos, which means serving the public, integrity, impartiality, transparency, etc. We are still striving between the notion of political neutrality versus responsiveness and loyalty to the government of the day. Should we serve blindly the government of the day? And the managers this government has decided to put in front of the organization? Or shall we be more politically neutral and able to serve the next government, which probably will be different because the democracy can bring in the government different parties, different values, different ideological choices. Impartiality versus care of special interest or loyalty to the ruling party. These are again a new set of contradictory values in which civil servants are pushed to be impartial or are told to be impartial, while at the same time they are told to be loyal to the ruling party. Fairness versus authoritarianism should be, when dealing with the citizens, try to be fair and apply fair procedures, or shall we just impose our views on the citizens who has less power than us, because we are the state, they are just subjects, citizens, if you like. Professional autonomy versus hierarchical control and obedience. Do we have a set of professional values that are clashing with, for example, the obedience you do to your superiors? They are professional state-of-the-art standards in different professions, lawyers, economists, political analysts, etc. These professional values, professional autonomy prevail over obedience? How this should be or could be managed? Accountability and transparency versus confidentiality. No further explanation is needed. Effectiveness against due procedure. Do we want to respect individual rights, or do we want to be effective in implementing the government policy? For example, should we respect property rights, or should we follow just to be effective and ignore property rights when applying a government policy? Efficiency versus due procedure. I have been told that I'm running out of time, so I will only say that in this context of contradictory values, the biggest cultural transformation which has been attempted internationally has been the new public management, which the results we know. I mean, the new public management was an attempt to introduce business-like administration into the public service. And in general, this approach has failed. Depending on countries, depending on areas of the administration, it has failed more or less. But still, we are still living on that tail of the new public management. In particular, I must say, in Central and Eastern European countries more than in the Western countries. Because in the Western countries, they have realized sooner that the new public management didn't work properly. So, because the public service is different from the business. So I need to stop here because I have other colleagues who want to speak. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Дуже дякуємо, Франциска, за виступ.
Thank you, Francisco, very much for your presentation. I'll be happy to give the floor to, according to the agenda, to Tetyana Vasylevska, who is going to introduce us to the values of the civil service. She is a professor of the Public Administration Department at the President of Ukraine Academy. Dear colleagues, thank you very much. The talk that we've kicked off is an interesting and substantial discussion, and I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the organizational culture is an alliance, a combination of values and principles which are proclaimed by the organization, in this case the public administration, and the implementation of these values and principles, how much these principles become the personal business of the members of the organization. So the organizational culture is made up of two layers: the legitimate, official, proclaimed culture, and the actual, sometimes we call it shadow, organizational culture. The actually operating values, norms and standards of conduct that exist elsewhere in the organizations. So our first part of the talk has given us a powerful picture of what we have today, what is the real organizational culture that operates. And the problems that we encounter compel us to think about it. Maybe we don't clearly enough formulate the principles and values of this legal or legitimate organizational culture. Maybe we are making some mistakes as we argue what the public administration should confess in the Ukrainian society. And I view my mission in our environment is to really kick off this discussion. What should the organizational culture of the public administration look like? And if we want to build completely new relations of the power and society, if we want these relations to be based on partnership, on a dialogue, on trust, we have to change something in the value potential, the value basics of the civil service of Ukraine. To understand what has to be changed, one has to find the sources thereof. If we talk about the values of the civil service as such, we have to be conscious of the fact that they are not artificial. They emerge in the society, and it's the society that shapes and models these values. And it's important as we create some models of the civil service to understand where that civil service is going to be functioning, in which conditions is it going to be operating in, such as the high level of tolerance to corruption in society is going to impact the values that will be implemented at the civil service. The rejection of whistleblowers as a morally positive phenomenon will also impact the analysis of this phenomenon by the civil servants. If the society considers this abnormal and amoral, then so will it be. So we are in this environment with certain cultural norms, and the lack of accounting for these norms and rules will actually demolish all our reform efforts. On the other hand, we have to realize that the public administration represents the state. It gives the standards for the society. And the positive changes in the public administration values is also about rebuilding and the influence on the society. So we have a two-way movement. That's the first thing I would like to mention. Secondly, the value of the public administration is not just a combination of what we've just mentioned. Let's add another value. Let's add one more value. It's a well-processed system to let us understand why do we need public administration? Why do we pay the operation of the civil servants? In other words, what is the purpose? What are the social functions? What is the mission of the civil service for the society? So as soon as we clearly answer that question, why we need the civil service, will we start building the system of values of thereof. But there are different options here. One answer is to serve the society, to serve the state, to provide services, to serve the citizens. But depending on how we answer that question, the entire tree of values will be built respectively. And the civil service of Ukraine should serve the people of Ukraine, like Olena Mykolaievna said, and should serve its citizen. Here we emphasize that it's the general interests that we care about, and we also care about every member of this society, and every citizen is part of this society. And by this mission, I always emphasize here the service to the society and to each citizen through the state mechanism. A civil servant cannot serve otherwise. He cannot break the law. He cannot violate some commitments as a civil servant. So this is also very important. Let me also draw your attention to the fact that the current values of a democratic civil service in a democratic nation are made of two parts. First are the so-called bureaucratic values. They are not necessarily confessed by democratic country civil servants. They are important for any civil servants, such as accountability, responsibility, professionalism, loyalty, and so on. They will be important everywhere, but for the civil servants of the countries, of the nations that build democracies, this second part of values is important, that we call democratic values. These are the values that where you respect the citizen, where you comply with the rights and freedoms, the citizenship values, the justice values, the inclusiveness values, tolerance values, and so on and so forth. So this is an additional set of values that is so much needed for civil servants in the democratic nations. How to combine these parts, these parts of values is always a challenge. I would like to thank the previous speaker for an interesting talk about the values, because values can actually conflict with each other. We have to see what's more important, what dominates, and these collisions will emerge between us quite often. But I would like to point out to some of them, although that has been mentioned. I'd like to point out again what will be the basic ones, what will be required of us if we talk about the mission, service to the society, service to each citizen through the mechanism of the government organization. One of the first priorities for us will be the values of democracy, humanism, and freedoms and rights of citizens. Of course, the freedoms and rights of citizens value will bring about inclusiveness. Everyone has to be to be heard, and everyone has the right to join. The freedom of rights and freedoms will bring about the freedom of tolerance. Even though we don't like someone, we have to serve everybody. So, and impartiality will come out of this because everyone is important. I don't have the right to be impartial. We have to specify impartiality, political impartiality in this sense. Another important value is patriotism. Such a value as the citizens' virtues to feel that you belong to this state and to your homeland. Another important value for the democratic civil service is the integrity and honesty. We interpret it as integrity now. However, let me point out to the fact that in the English version, integrity doesn't contain the word good. It's the integrity of the person. So you go by your words, you act by your words. Within the integrity word, you feel that very clearly of what is expected of civil servants. I would also like to draw attention to the fact, to the value which has been missed out by the law on civil service of Ukraine, which is the value of justice. We have forgotten that it is another key value for civil servants. And with regards, both with regards to its implementation for society and with regards to its implementation for the public administration, because a meritocratic principle is the principle of justice. It's the promotion based on the merits. It's the principle of justice. And here I would like to support our leader of the trade unions, because as we talk about the protection of rights and freedoms of humans and citizens, we equally have to talk about the protection of rights and freedoms of the citizens that are at the civil service. So the respect to personality and to those we are working with, to the citizens, as well as the people who are part of the civil service. Another important set of values are openness, efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, which are not always reflected in the documents that that prescribe and make the set of values at the public administration. There's another final statement. I'd like to say that it's not enough to call upon the civil servants to something. It's not enough to provide training to them. We have to create the conditions and procedures of the public administration that would motivate, that would support the best, that would not allow for some unnecessary, non-integral, non-democratic actions within the public administration. So we have to find from different ways to find the ways to shape organizational structure. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. I wish you inspiration and strength. Thank you. Thank you, Tetyana. And it is absolutely reasonable to listen to some applicable aspects. I would like to give the floor to Olga Prokhorenko, who is the head of Department of HRM of the National Bank of Ukraine. Not everybody knows that in the corporate culture headhunter nomination, you are winners. You will share your victories and your failures and your experience of transforming the culture of the at the National Bank of Ukraine is something we would like for you to share with us. Thank you very much. I have not been invited quite frequently. I'm happy to come if I have time. Those who joined this discussion and who have been part of this discussion are great performers, I do see some steps that have been made ahead. I'm very happy as a representative of the bank HR sector and as a citizen, because there are some good results. Thank you very much, everybody. Speaking of the National Bank of Ukraine and the corporate culture in particular, I'd like to say up front that we've started working on the corporate culture back in the times when we were part of the public administration. When we saw that something was happening, because we got out of the civil service, and we started out when we were still part of the civil service. Now we have a very interesting case, because the law of Ukraine was passed on split, and we are being joined by a great number of people who are civil servants from the financial services divisions, and we are going to have another stage of combining two different cultures. And I believe that we have to check how it works out. We will have to. It's always interesting to combine two cultures in any sector, and it's a certain challenge for us. With regards to our achievements and failures, I would like to mention those. The colleagues that cooperate with us are not always apt to share them. Everybody wants to really talk about the achievements, but we also want to mention the failures. We don't want you to be in the wrong shoes. When we can talk about the corporate culture in two dimensions, the technical component, the instrumental component, it seems like everything's fine with that. We know how to conduct opinion polls, surveys, how to do team buildings, how to train, how to present something. And another point is more essential. It should be the first priority, is the mission, the external context that we shouldn't miss out. And that before we start working on the culture of any institution, the government, the civil service, the National Bank of Ukraine, some company, we have to understand why we have this institution in the first place. What is its mission? What is it for? We have to understand what is its goal, what is the purpose, how we're moving in that direction, and depending on the culture or depending on the human values, we will see the implementation of that mission. Oftentimes we miss out that aspect. We forget the culture, and we start working with the culture as soon as we see the need for it. We join some organization and say, okay, let's start with the culture. Often we start working with the culture just from training, which is important. But we have to realize that as you join some group of people, as you listen to something, no changes will take place. You just go and listen to it, and the person leaves the training and nothing happens. The same applies sometimes to the meetings of people with parallel cultures. We think that this is going to be a joint milkshake, and something new will come out of this. Not always it is the case. So the first aspect we have to realize is that we have to understand why should the institution or the public administration exist? What is its mission? And here I'd like to add that we have to understand who are the customers of that market, and depending on the needs, we should act accordingly. The National Bank of Ukraine is one of the success stories. We have our clientele. We study their needs. We build ourselves. We adapt to the needs of our clients. So all the processes that we build inside are aimed at meeting the client's needs. And our key client, which is the Ukrainian society, Ukrainian citizens. It's also important to take into account the current context, the Ukrainian context, and how we grow mentally, because oftentimes we have to listen to what's happening in other countries, but we also have to account for our context. The public administration cannot be separated. It should not just understand who it is working with, but should also realize that they're part of the human beings. We really miss that context. So we are very grateful. I'm very grateful to the colleague. He mentioned that there are outwardly oriented people. It's the most right one. The National Bank of Ukraine was very much closed. The civil service was really closed. And the biggest changes for us is that we have become more open. And there's a greater number of problems that come our way, and there is some freedom. But it's more difficult to manage it if you have things closed. So this is the outward context. With regards to the substantial part, another important part, the National Bank of Ukraine, in my opinion, is that we have had changes because one of the first steps was the replacement of all the management. It's not a popular measure, but the changes really depend on the leaders, on the managers. When the leaders tell me, what are you going to do with our culture? If they don't like something, okay, I always respond to them. It's not a question to me, it's a question to you because you shape the culture. What are you going to do so that the culture in our organization will change and develop? Speaking of the toolkit, I would like to thank you for the study. It's very interesting. I would also like to receive it, and I'll be very grateful to you if you send it to us. We also conduct our studies. We did the first value studies in 2015. We were back at the civil service at that time. For the first time at the bank, at hot dogs, 10% of people actually were involved, and 1,400 people took part in the study. So we work with these 5 P values. We also had focus groups, and we had in-depth interviews just to understand the technicality of that. So these are 5 Ps: patriotism, professionalism, again, integrity, transparency, and partnership. It's been 5 years, and we're looking at how we're going to change these values. So this is which is a good story. We have a 5+ years mission. So 15 or 20+ years is the vision. And also we have about the 5 years plus values. So we're looking at the values. We are conducting this study ourselves. We hold focus groups, and the values are becoming more humane at the National Bank of Ukraine. It's interesting for any other government institution. That doesn't mean that we are going to change these 5 Ps, but we are going to put the new emphases, and we will have more team values, human responsibility or accountability or awareness. We'll be happy to share our results with you. In 2016, we did the first corporate culture study. Apart from the values, we had internal motivation of people. What are the 3 drivers for them? Leadership, interaction, and attitude to changes. It's very great that you start by locating yourselves where we are, right? So we did this in the same way. We didn't use so many standard schemes, according to a certain methodology. We just did the way we wanted. And annually, we also explored point 17 and 18. We don't have the only corporate culture in a bank. We have a lot of subcultures, and you shouldn't be intimidated by subcultures. There's nothing wrong about them. They cooperate, and they make our organization very flexible and interesting. And we do have different cultures, and we accept that as a norm. We accept that as a peculiarity of our organization. So if you come up with some subcultures, and I'm sure it's the way, just accept this and cooperate. This is what we do, and we'll move forward. And I believe that even some structural changes, not strategic and structural changes and processes, will be built up according to the cultural traits. Next year, we'll update our strategy. The strategy of the National Bank of Ukraine will be developing it with the two emphases, the processes and the people. The previous was focused on processes and structures, and there was some people involved in that as well. So we agreed with the Department of Strategies that we'll be moving towards that end. This year, we'll be conducting a new study, engagement, involvement, trust. We did this in 2016. Engagement is your engagement in the organization. Involvement is the involvement in the work. If you really like the work, it's important for us because it's been 5 years and a lot of transformations have taken place. People got tired. We have to understand that we have to do something with these people because we're an open entity. We participate in a lot of HR brand contests along with commercial and government organizations. By the way, the Mariupol City Council, the Mariupol City Council, they're part of this. I wish them success. They have a great project. And because we have become open, we have a problem that the people that are interesting for us, they leave us. Because they're looking, they already have the wings behind their backs, and they feel potent and powerful enough to look for other options. Sometimes they think that we're not so rapid. We're not as energetic, and this is a challenge for us. So the engagement in the work is very important. And let's also mention this, is the trust. We research trust because we realize that without trust in our organization, we won't be able to move forward. Again, I'd like to say that we've been doing all this jointly or in a link. And according to the strategy and the changes in the strategy, according to the organizational changes that our organization needs, with the client orientation, and using the entire context in Ukraine, how this country is changing, which requirements it's posing, and the general context of the entire globe. Because we also have to realize that sometimes we want to think there's Ukraine somewhere out there and there's the rest of the world somewhere out there with other laws of physics. We have to realize that all these global trends in the world, they impact ourselves. I'd like to argue one thing. To make this happen, you have to just do it. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the World Brand for this message. Sometimes we just record it and we forget to do it. And we should not forget to do this. The first step is the most difficult one, but then it will be much easier. Another important point, I as an HR person, it seems to me sometimes that we are trying to put too much of a burden on the HR people, too much responsibility. It's not the HR people that shape the culture. Of course, we represent the culture, and hopefully I deliver some good message to the world and to my organization. And I am a powerful driver. Maybe I'm not modest enough, but an HR can't change everything, even though you have a great HR team. It's about the work of the managers, the leaders. An HR can only be here an advisor, consultant, a coordinator, and a driver with other stakeholders, however. So I do wish you all find leadership in yourselves, because a lot depends on you. Just do it, and we'll make it happen. Thank you. Ms. Olga, thank you very much. And on this note, we would like to give the floor to Deputy Head of Department of Military Chaplain Service, the key chaplain of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, the key advisor on strategy and communication, a teacher of the Ukrainian Academy of Leadership and the co-founder of the Ukrainian Academy of Leadership. I'd like to give the floor to Andriy Zelinsky, who is going to introduce us to his vision on the meaning for the civil service. Thank you very much. I'll try to carry on this discussion and sort of change the discourse in this audience by always being loyal to the topic of values. We have heard the word values here a lot, because the values is not the motto, but the criteria to make personal decisions. The norms that become criteria to make personal decisions can change the personality, but can also transform the quality of a society jointly with the organizational culture. In terms of the ethos, I'm personally engaged in a lot of ethos formation projects with the armed services of Ukraine, in not just in different cultures. And one of the important points that has been discussed today is the point of values as the mechanisms that are able to transform the culture and the quality of culture. And often we also heard the word mission today. However, very rarely did we hear the concept of vision, because it is the vision that explains the mission. Which kind of world would we like to see after us? And the famous Ukrainian writer Skovoroda said once that we have to take the responsibility to make this world a better place. It's an important motto. We will make this world a better place, not someone else. We will. So if we talk about the ethos of the civil service and the Civil Service Code in the United Kingdom, for instance, the set of values that have been mentioned, and there's a very clear set of values there, includes integrity, honesty, objectivity, and impartiality. So we are talking about the values of objectivity, integrity, and impartiality. But this is the set of values which enables us to ensure an efficient operation of the system, and we want something more here. We are at the stage in this country where we want just more than just an efficiently operational system. We need a breakthrough to ensure for an efficient operation of the system in the public administration as well as. So, what can we find, or how can we look for the values that are pertinent to our Ukrainian environment, as opposed to the previous discourse? I'd like to throw out to you some philosophic intuition by a famous Ukrainian philosopher of the 20th century, Mr. Krimsky, in terms of mentality and the culture, and the national culture, to propose to you a philosophic concept where you would be able to shape your own national ethos of the civil servant. Most of all, the intuition of another classical philosopher of Ukraine, Mr. Skovoroda. He speaks of the related work. This is the work that reflects the internal disposition of the human being. This is something that makes us happy. I'm not sure if in the corporate culture, environment, or at the public administration, if we can talk about what could be the source of happiness. But it's worth it to execute the tasks and goals, but you feel the mechanisms, the presence of mechanisms for the personal realization, for self-realization at the civil service. And as we speak of the society, we talk about the role of the military. So the one who was born a soldier will be happy. This is something you need to do in your life. What can be sweeter than the military business for a military? You have to protect the society, you have to defend the truth. So this is the classical approach of the Ukrainian philosophy in our history. And Skovoroda is saying that society has some truth, that there are some value principles. And here it's important to realize where they are. And one of the sources of the Russian literature argue that often because of the disorder, the companies can die. So we have to remove the disorder. We have to give some rational dimensions to our service. How to overcome the anarchy because of which the whole companies or battalions can die. And Krimsky said that our Eastern Slavic civilization has been taken from the Byzantine culture. Russia took the idea of the Third Rome from there. Ukraine has taken up the idea of the wisdom of life. Our country originated in the wild flatlands and off the coast of the sea. Russia has withstood thanks to the hard power. Ukraine has withstood thanks to freedom and wisdom. And when we talk about the steppe, it's about violence, it's about the influence of the hordes, the Mongol hordes, right? We know the historic context. But the steppe is always present in our mentality, the field. According to Krimsky, these are the dimensions where our culture was formed, our collective consciousness, our mentality was formed. If we analyze our folklore and the songs and proverbs that we use, there are three important dimensions where we have to look for the foundations of the values for the culture of the civil service. So what the fields that we have defeated, the houses. The house is more than just a place where you spend your night, right? So the church, so the field, the house, and the church are three important dimensions of our mentality. Even if we try to organize the public administration, we have to think how to construct this value space that we call a house. From the anarchy that the soldiers can die to the spiritual development. The ability to think with some value categories about our social being. Three possible dimensions. The ontologic optimism, and for Krimsky, it's the ability to make a value breakthrough into any institutional anarchies. Even though the state dies, we still have the Cossacks, the Cossack possibilities. So at some ideological level, we have to overcome the chaos, the institutions that can overcome the rational institutions. That's what the civil servants can do. The wisdom is the right values based on which we can build certain functional stories, institutes, and institutions. And it's the spiritual wisdom and the emotional intellect, the ability to comprehend with the system of in-depth senses and our being. So we can bring it up to the three mechanisms that are based on the mental, cultural sectors. We have to move away the chaos. When we talk about the breakthrough, when we try to think about the value component of the public administration or the culture of organization in Ukraine, we have to eliminate the chaos from which soldiers die. Another component is how to construct on that space where we eliminated the chaos. How can we construct the value ecosystem? The ethos that is going to provide to us the system of value benchmarks, the criteria of making personal decisions. it's very dangerous when the values become simple motors where they shake the air but they don't change anything. They don't construct the system of attitudes. And the third point is how to fill the action with the sense. So the field, the house, the church. How to eliminate the chaos, and how to fill the action with sense, and how to construct the value ecosystem. So this is what I picked up under the oak tree. This is the place where we heard about the victory of the 300 Sparta soldiers. We understand that an acorn is a symbol of something very strong. It's the oak tree, because the oak tree is something you can lean against. But we wouldn't have this motivating ethos if we didn't had the 300 Sparta soldiers. If we didn't have the culture, if we didn't have the system of values that can shape a certain consciousness of a certain quality, and the personality of a certain quality. So both the stone and the acorn tell us that we have a demand for the national ethos, using the national peculiarities. This is also a pressing issue today. How to break through this chaos, how to construct the value ecosystem, and how to fill the action with sense. To implement a certain vision, which is clearly formulated, thanks to which we will be able to implement the vision that will enable the civil servants of Ukraine to feel the people, to feel themselves happy with a potent resource of personal comfort. Thank you very much, Mr. Andriy. Everyone was really excited about your speech, and it's absolutely logical that we have built up our discussion, that all the speakers end and pick up the message that I would like to introduce to you an interesting speaker, Єlіseeva, who has fostered the development of our journey across the regions, and she's been cooperating with the OSCE in Ukraine project, and she is the manager of the dialogue fostering project, the OSCE coordinator. I'd like to introduce her as a speaker and her talk, the tools of the dialogue, the civil service. So we spent a lot of time with her during the tour. Please, a few words about our cultural component. Hello, dear colleagues. I'm very pleased to be with you here. Actually, as we talk about the dialogue, it is a very common buzzword today whereby not every person makes the same sense in it and not the same meaning in it. They perceive it as a tool for creating some quality changes. For OSCE, for our organization, the concept of dialogue is very important, because a while ago, when this organization was created, it was created as part of dialogue, and it is for the sake of dialogue between the European countries that it was formed. In 2013, when Ukraine, in 2014, when Ukraine encountered the conflict, Ukrainians started to look for new ways of interaction and approached OSCE for assistance. And it is then that the OSCE project coordinator helped to provide the understanding between the citizens and institutions. At that time, our efforts were aimed at Ukrainian East, the Ukrainian East, where we had a platform for dialogue for the local municipalities, local government officials, civil society, the entrepreneurs, and of course the representatives of the central authorities on a number of issues, starting from decentralization and demining, down to demining. Later on, as part of this dialogue support, we had been receiving requests from other sectors. There were requests to implement a dialogue in the reform sector, as well as the public administration sector. And beginning 2016, on demand upon request from different government agencies, we developed dialogue skills online courses for various audiences. We have held a series of dialogues where on such contentious issues where other communication means didn't work. We keep supporting the development of the community of facilitators and mediators in Ukraine, and all these events that we have been holding. Thanks to these events, we try to help other stakeholders to come up with and adopt and implement some viable solutions at various levels. As we talk about the trainings, the participants, we try to give to the training participants the tools and skills that could help them be more efficient and do their work in a more productive way. Such skills include active listening skills or active communication skills, management, conflict management skills, and others. And all these skills and tools shape the dialogue approach to the work. In our opinion, is absolutely important for the civil servants, either at individual meetings or at negotiations, or as they develop some local strategies, development strategies, or as they shape government policy, as they make government policies. At the public administration, the most of work is focused on the relations between people. And if these relations are built on the understanding, on the inclusiveness of opinions, on cooperation, the work will be performed in a more efficient way, in a more quality way. This year, as it was mentioned, we have cooperated with the Office of Reforms of the Cabinet of Ministers and the National Agency for Civil Service by introducing dialogue competencies in the culture of civil service. And we did this as part of the reform of public administration. We have developed and held a series of comprehensive trainings on conflict management for the employees of CSA as well as HRM divisions of the Oblast and Rayon state administrations. And now we continue to develop the spectrum of tools and courses for the civil servants. We are developing a new online dialogue skills course for the civil servants, and talks are being held with the Ukrainian governance school to include such a course for professional development of civil servants in the curriculum. Finally, I'd like to share a feedback of one of the participants of this year's training. That training took place in Kiev, and the following day after the training, this participant came up to the participant who's an HRM manager in Kiev Oblast. He came up to her and said, "I didn't sleep half the night." And when he was asked why, he said, "I've analyzed and I changed my attitude, and as a result of the training, he realized that he could behave differently in those situations." And I was really impressed by that. I was really happy to hear that, because this is something we understand and imply by the transformation of the culture of civil service. And such a transformation begins from individual people, individual civil servants. And I'm very happy that we as an organization are joining in this process. Thank you, dear colleagues, for your cooperation. And I hope that we will not stop there and will continue to disseminate the dialogue culture in Ukraine. I would also like to point out that we have some very good practical handbook on dialogue and conflictology, and the tools. You can find them in the handouts. In the materials folder, which you can find as you push the link. Thank you very much. That is true. We can confirm that. We did really travel with OSCE and the Rayon administrations and CSA. We did do that work. We did cover the slides that we mentioned at the first panel when we said, yes, there are values out there, there are missions by the groups of people who have worked during our strategic sessions. And today, we all have the opportunity to be responsible for these achievements, and we'll share these materials with you. We'll be working with them in part 2. We'll kick off a strategic session after a 10-minute break where you'll all be able to rest. So let's thank again our panelists of panel 2. Thank you very much for joining us and giving us your professional inputs and information on your vision, what you feel. Thank you for sharing your experiences, and we hope that you will stay with us and will be analyzing the material. So let's thank you again, and let's break for a short period. Thank you. 15 minutes.